just want to make sure this starts.
You know, maybe it'll be easier for the people to see on the streaming. Good. Great.
Once a month or so. So I was really happy when Hadassah contacted me and said, do you want to do this? And we do it under the dance group. I said, yes, please. And thank you to Hadassah for basically doing everything. I just showed up and had to my bagel or my buttocks or put it out. They did it also. Hadassah, thank you. Also for the topic today, it's such a in the news thing, especially last 8 months for obvious reasons. So I think people are real curious to what is this trans issue that we keep reading about and people are getting all bent out of shape about. So I'm really happy to have the team here and Hadassah for organizing it. Second, I'm going to introduce Phyllis Steinberg from Hadassah, not yet. First, I want to say thank you to Gail Gerstein from rest of the panel I don't know, except I wanted to make a special welcome to Kat Kavanaugh, who I remember from when he was this little and was a student here in the religious school. He was a friend of my daughter, Anya. Welcome back. And now we'll turn it over to Hadassah and to Phyllis to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome all of you to this very important program that Buffalo Hadassah has been planning for almost a year. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Phyllis Steinberg, and I'm on the leadership team of Buffalo Hadassah, our chapter. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of people, the help of a lot of people to put together such a program. Of course, we're very grateful to our illustrious panel for volunteering. And Dr. Gail Gerstein, Erie County Health Commissioner and Adolescent Medicine Specialist, will introduce our panelists. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank Gail for all of her hard work in helping to arrange this program. Other thanks go to Dr. Evelyn Hurwitz, who actually started the ball rolling when I first talked to her about Hadassah's interest in offering such a program. Congregation Shir Shalom has just been amazing in every possible way. Not only have they been welcoming, but incredibly helpful and supportive. With, of course, a special thank goes to Rabbi Alex for saying, "Oh, sure, we'll do this program here," and to Executive Director Joanne Arpese and Dan Kester in the men's group. And lastly, I want to thank our Hadassah board for their hard work and determination to present this program. As I said, we've been working on this for close to a year. Now, I would like to just add a few words about Hadassah. It's the largest women's Zionist organization in the world. In the United States alone, there are nearly 300,000 members, supporters, and associates across 50 states. I'd like to read just a little bit from their civil and human rights policy statement, because it certainly affects why we're doing this program and why we feel so strongly about it. Hadassah reaffirms its support for equality and equal protections under law for persons of all sexual orientations and gender identities in the United States. While Hadassah remains deeply committed to the American ideal of religious liberty, it maintains that the protection of individual civil rights must, in many circumstances, take precedence over personal religious beliefs. Hadassah strongly opposes all efforts, whether through legislation, referendum, or on constitutional amendment, that would selectively limit or deny these rights to LGBTQ Americans. There will be a Q&A, which will be explained by Gail, who will now introduce our panelists.
Thank you, and good morning, and thank everybody for coming. It really means a lot to me. It's really moving to me that so many people were interested and came out on a beautiful Sunday morning to listen to learn about this really important topic. So as mentioned, I'm Gail Gerstein. I'm a pediatrician. I specialize in adolescent medicine. I'm a member of Congregation Shir Shalom and Hadassah, and I'm also the health commissioner here, and also on the pediatric faculty at the Jacobs School of Medicine. So just want to let you, I'm going to introduce the panel and explain how this is going to work. So before I introduce the panel, just to set up expectations, So initially, we were going to have everybody present briefly for 10 or 15 minutes about their area of expertise, and then open up for Q&A. But we thought it would be better if, instead of us trying to assume what you wanted to learn, that you could come and ask questions. And to make it easier, I can walk around with a mic and just raise your hand and ask questions. But we really want to hear from you what information that you want to hear from our experts. And you shouldn't feel embarrassed. There's no question that's stupid. Probably if you have a question, there's probably at least 20 other people in the room who had the same question, but you're just brave enough to ask it. So, and then also, I guess, are there cards or something if people don't want to get up? That where are those going to be? Oh, they're on the tables, but we can also pass that around if people don't want to speak by the microphone. But everybody feel comfortable. I hope everybody feels that this is a safe space. And we have law enforcement protecting us outside. Unfortunately, we have to do that these days. I just want everybody to feel comfortable asking whatever questions that you have, because again, there's no question that is too simple or you shouldn't feel embarrassed at all. Because we all have to learn somehow, right? So this is a great opportunity. Especially, so we're going to be talking about gender affirming care and just the journey of transitioning and kind of struggles and opportunities and challenges, and just so everybody understands what the situation is, because there are unfortunately up until January it was really easier than it has been in the past for people to declare their gender identity, and it was more encouraged, I think, than it ever has in the past, and now it's being villainized, which is completely ridiculous. Unfortunately, in New York State, we're still safe, we're still protected here, and I hear from colleagues who do this work that actually people are moving to New York State just to receive these services safely. So again, I think there are so many people that have somebody in their life that has been or is currently going through this journey, and I think we all want to feel comfortable understanding it and being able to understand what to say that will be affirming to people, and so this is a great opportunity. So I just want to go around and just introduce folks. So. Right, they have mics up, but just briefly introduce. This is Matt, and this is Jack, and this is Maria, and this is Kathy. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and they can explain to you their connection to this important topic. So you want to start, Matt?
Thank you, Dr. Burstein. My name is Matt Green-Higgins, AVP of Specialty Care at Evergreen Health. I have worked in the related fields of HIV treatment and prevention, drug user health, sexual health, sex worker health, and gender affirming healthcare since I was 22, which is a very long time ago. This is my 24th year working in those related fields. Thank you very much for having us today.
My name is Jack Kavanaugh, and I'm the Executive Director of GLIS Western New York, which is an agency that provides resources and support to LGBTQ youth and families and their friends and allies. We also, a few months ago in May, took over operating the Pride Center in Western New York, so I also oversee those programs, which is similar community-based programming for LGBTQ adults, all the way up to our Silver Pride Seniors program. I've been working in this position for almost 4 years now, but I've spent the past about 20 years working predominantly with youth in different educational, social work settings and things like that. And the right thing said, this is where I had my bar mitzvah, 100 feet that way. So it's nice to be back.
Good morning, friends. It's just lovely to see so many folks here. My name is Maria White. I am a friend of Dr. Gale. She and I work together at the county. I spent 7 years as the Deputy County Executive, and now I serve as the Chief Community Impact Officer at the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo. But none of that is why I'm here. I'm here because I am the parent of a transgender youth.
Oh, and I just want to mention that we were 2025. If you want to look it up. Also, Maria, and she was just talking about her family's journey and her experience being a parent of a person who wanted to transition, wanted to come out, and then was able to go through that journey with the medical care of Kathy. If you we have copies, if you're interested, I can keep them up here, or you can look it up again in the Buffalo News editorials from February 23rd, 2025. But it's very moving piece.
So I'm Kathy Bettine. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, and I'm at the Jacobs School of Medicine and UBMD and Oshai. And I have been an endocrinologist for over 25 years, and I actually take care of about 100 kids who are gender non-conforming, and I believe that Evergreen actually takes care of the same number of kids. So, and we actually have seen tons of families moving here from other states, and I have patients that come from as far away as 3 and 4 hour drive to be seen.
Thank you. So that is our panel, and who's going to be willing to ask the first question? And if we get it rolling, it'll be easier. Yes. Evelyn.
So there's a lot of questions, right, that would come up from all of those illustrious panel. They kind of all enter the journey that these young people have, or not so young when they get to you.
Okay.
And so my question is, how do people get to you? And at what age do you typically see them? At age 3, at age 5, puberty, beyond that? And how do they enter this arena of care?
So I would say most of the patients present around age 15, but I have a few patients that come around 7-ish and others that come around 10-ish. And basically, they either come because the pediatrician referred them, or prior to Evergreen having a pediatric practice, they used to refer kiddos to us. And sometimes kids just come because they heard about us and they self-refer themselves. And the younger kids, we meet with like once a year and just talk about the journey and what to expect in the future. The kids that are closer to puberty, we offer them puberty blockers so that they have more time to figure out if this is the journey they want or not.
Something that has been interesting in the past, I think, 13 or 14 years is that language has evolved over time, and with that, awareness has increased over time. And so within my career span, I spent 3 years as the senior director of the Pride Center of Western New York, and at that time, it was like around 2014 is what is sometimes socially called the transgender tipping point, which is the time when there was greater public awareness and to a degree, greater acceptance. And so around that time, there weren't as many practices even doing gender-affirming care. The paradigms around the way the care was provided were changing, but also we were realizing that there are more people of trans experience than we ever would have estimated. Like early on, like in the 90s, people used to kind of offhandedly, we're LGBTQ people in general, we're not a census tract, so it's always hard to estimate, but people used to estimate like 1 to 2% of the population might be a person of trans experience. We now have, and again, Dr. Bettine has a lot of patients too, we now have in our practice more people of trans experience in our practice than I would have thought when I worked at the Pride Center even existed in Western New York. And to a degree, some of that is having more language. And so at the time doing that type of work, we were seeing, and this still happens, a fair number of adults coming to the Pride Center for support who were newly able to describe themselves with language that had evolved. And so we would sometimes see people, and I'll be as frank as possible, these are quotes, someone would say, like, I used to think I was just like a bush lesbian, but I'm actually like a transmasculine person. And even those are like terms that we don't hear as commonly anymore, but it was evolving. Like people were realizing there's actually like a word or other people who feel these things that I feel, and that I think increased the number of people that we were seeing, and also caused us to realize that the goals were not going to be binary. Amongst our almost 2,000 patients of trans experience, many of them do not have surgical goals. A fair number of them are not interested in hormone replacement therapy, but are just looking for someone to affirm their identity that's different than what society generally knows and expects. And so I think we've learned over time there are more people who identify this way, there are more ways to identify, and the awareness, brings peace to a lot of people in order to figure out who they are and how to describe that.
I really appreciate your answer, and the language is so important. I would answer the question just to say that the journey is usually a difficult one. At least that was true, certainly in our experience. So my kiddo really didn't emerge with, feeling gender dysphoria until puberty hit in the 5th grade. But bless her baby heart, she kept that to herself until the 7th grade and really suffered in silence, without telling my husband or I. And finally, when we got to this, to see our pediatrician and then made our way to Dr. Patine, she had already been through puberty. The option of puberty blockers was no longer on the table, and she really developed anorexia. And she was, in one summer, it was the summer of 2020, while the pandemic was raging and isolation was really, bearing down on everyone, she just quit eating. And in 50 days, she was down 35 pounds and counting. And we needed to seek more, she had been going to counseling through through a therapist, but we really needed to escalate things. And I talk a little bit about this in the column, that the journey was very difficult. And really, before we could seek gender-affirming care, we had to address a very immediate threat to her life in her anorexia. So, that's an experience that talks a little bit about the stages of development in a young person's life, and then, what really can be the threats if we don't act on the treatment as necessary and as quickly as we might need to.
I was just going to add briefly, in terms of the sort of question of how do they sort of find us and how do people kind of access these resources, one of the main ways is through stuff like this, and all of you now know us and know what we offer, because so much of it happens through word of mouth, and one of the things that I talk about a lot is the last thing that I want is someone that's like a parent, for example, or a kid themselves, like just sort of Googling around for resources and finding like God knows what, or ending up in some like weird, Facebook group somewhere that's just like, there's just so much misinformation out there that we really want to make sure that if people have questions, they're coming to people like us who can answer them from sort of a place of expertise and knowledge. And so, I say that to say that now, like, all of you are now like, in our network of like, please, the people in your life like need these resources. This is places you can send them. We all work like super closely together. Like, this is not the first time any of us stuff like that. So like, we all know each other. It's not a big community of resources, and so please, like, you are now one of the ways that we find out and people find us.
Those are powerful ways too. People trust people that they know. So if you heard that Jack was a good guy, I would agree. And then if you tell people, if you go to his organization, like, that means a lot to people. It's also probably harder now in some ways. Dr. Burstein made reference to things having changed since January, and that is causing, and I don't like it. We have to find ways sometimes to do the same work and describe it differently, because, and we've experienced this at Evergreen, there are computers looking for words on websites, and then you hear from your federal, it's a complicated time to make sure that people have the right information in a world that is trying to make information disappear.
Thank you.
Thank you, all for being here. I have a question. It's more of a science question about the puberty blockers. I don't understand how it would work and at what age do you have to do it. I mean, obviously before puberty really hits, but they're children. How do they know that there is something wrong or not? I don't even know the words. Different. Thank you. Whoever's different.
So I don't know that they actually know. They just know that, I mean, I've seen children who will say they're biologically a boy and their brother is biologically a boy, and the child will say, this is my brother and I'm the sister. So they recognize what a boy is, but they'll say, I'm not a boy. And I don't know why some kids feel this way and other kids do not. But the kids that come to me, the parents are like, they've always said this, they've always acted differently. And I feel that puberty blockers are very safe. We've used puberty blockers in kids with early puberty for many, many years. I've had kids from the age of 2 to the age of 12 on puberty blockers with no bad effects. So I feel like puberty blockers are the right step when somebody starts puberty and it makes them feel worse. And I tell them, this is just a pause so you can figure out what you want to do. And every visit, I say, do you want to continue with this, or do you want to go and let nature take its course and finish puberty as whatever sex you were born? And, most of the time I see changes in their mental health, that they are so happy when we offer them puberty blockers. I agree, their brains are still developing, which is why we do the puberty blocker and we don't start gender-affirming hormone therapy, because we want them to have time to develop their brain and figure out what is right for them.
If I could just give like a little epi background, because in pediatrics, we all learn that kids, can understand gender by the age of 3. So they identify what gender, they have their gender identity by the age of 3. And then also a couple years ago in the Medical Journal of Pediatrics, published by the American Academy of Pediatrics, it's a medical peer-reviewed journal. There were a couple articles published. One was a school-based survey in Pittsburgh public schools, asking about gender issues, and the other was another school-based survey in, I think, West Virginia and Appalachia, and that was also asking about gender. And in both surveys, almost 10% of students, I said that they did not identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So this is, like a larger issue than just, the 1 to 2% that I think has historically been cited in, in the literature based on older surveys. So just to see, just to better understand that, the magnitude. And then also from adolescent medicine perspective, by the age of 12, we all feel comfortable that kids without any developmental disabilities are able to provide informed consent for their own medical care. So by the age of whenever they come to medical care, or even in early adolescence, they can understand the risks and benefits of the treatment and make their own choices. And in adolescent medicine, we do this not infrequently for topics or medical conditions that in New York State adolescents have the right to consent to on their own without their parents, like mostly sexual health care and then mental health care and substance abuse care over the age of 16. So this is not anything new. So thank you. And Maria, were you gonna say something?
I think maybe the only thing I would add is that, Lindsay really emerged with that dysphoria in the 5th grade when puberty hit, and I think it was very difficult for her to find the language to give voice to her feelings. And she's a very bright kiddo. She did lots and lots and lots of research on her own in order to find the words, in order to give voice to how she was feeling, and that took some time, for her to find that. But she, I think, really began to recognize that sense of dysphoria really at the time puberty hit.
I think also within the question too, there's concern about will people change their mind, or what if it was the wrong decision for them? And so at Evergreen we have, again, just under 2,000 patients of trans experience. And of those 2,000, we've only ever had one person who sought some type of actual, all care that affirms a person's gender is gender affirming. But when I say it sought gender affirming care, I mean hormones or like a movement toward a surgical procedure. And we've only had one person in all of the time that we've been doing that determined after being on hormones for a period of time, like, this isn't right for me. But even in that, they don't frame it as a mistake. It was something that they needed to do in order to kind of figure out what was right for them. And so I think something that gets tossed around a lot is this notion that people are going to change their mind, or that there's a phase. As a gay person, I heard, in the 90s, like, this might be a phase, and it just wasn't. And for having known thousands of people of trans experience, and people are to go to the length to like affirm yourself in a world that wants to deny that you exist. Like it's just, I'm not going to say it's impossible because I can't say it's impossible, but it's very, very, very unlikely that someone is going to go to the lengths, even when it's as. Now listen, none of this is easy, right? You have a supportive parent and an excellent doctor, and it was still hard. Right? So like with an incredibly supportive parent in the Elmwood Village, who knows everybody, she knows Dr. Burstein in a Unitarian church, and it was still hard. And it was still, I broke the microphone over. I mean, it was that difficult, so it's understandable when these things are unfamiliar. But it just does not happen with any real amount of frequency the way that we hear.
I was just going to add one thing. The one thing I add to this too, you talk about this a lot, particularly from like a non-medical, clinical perspective, is also that, the more we allow, especially these kids, to create space and give them the vocabulary to play with their identity, the easier it is for them to start to process those things earlier. And maybe they do decide, like, hey, I tried this for a little bit, this wasn't really who I am. They wouldn't have known if they weren't able to live in that world for a little while. And that's okay. Like, it's not a bad thing. One of my best friends from high school transitioned and was a trans woman, and then was like, actually, I think I'm non-binary, and whatever it was, but that was their journey, and like, that was fine. But they felt a lot of weirdness and like shame around the idea of being like, we're presenting as this trans woman, and now I kind of want to like, that's not who I am, actually. But they wouldn't have known that had they not lived that experience for a while. And in many ways, that would have been way easier to do when we were in middle school and high school, to explore different parts of your identity, as middle school and high school young people do in many parts of their life. Rather than having to do that in like the workplace when they're 30 years old, which is a lot more difficult and traumatic for a lot of people. And so the more time we give people spaces as youth to have these conversations, explore safely, we're giving them a better chance, I think, to be successful as an adult, because especially for access to a family programming like ours, where they can get that support, it's going to be a lot, in many ways, safer and more supported, because there's legal requirements for schools and the way they have to work with young people. Like, there's just more kind of support to do this as a young person, versus when you're 30 years old in the workplace and decide to transition can be a lot more difficult and traumatic for people. So I think that's another really important reason why it's really helpful to let young people explore these things, as a kid, because it's just easier.
So on the science question, Dr. Mateen, would it be fair then to say like the puberty blockers kind of buy a person time, in essence, before their body makes permanent changes?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I believe is it's buying them time. And also adding on, I've had 2 patients who changed their mind, and one of them I talked to afterwards, and I said, did I make a mistake starting you on hormone therapy? And she said, absolutely not. That was part of my journey. I needed to do that.
Thanks. I just want to, I received a couple written questions. So one of them I want to ask right now because it's a definition question. So the person asked, to please define transgender and transsexuality. So I think there's probably other vocabulary that would be good for you all to define.
Sure. I mean, so the question is to define transgender and transsexuality.
And I guess queer, right?
And queer, yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Well, funny. Okay, not a funny thing. Let's just, okay. Any group. There's never total agreement, right? Like, I am not Jewish by culture, but I've heard that this concept exists in Jewish culture, where like all Jewish people don't agree on the same thing. Is that true at all? I've heard. I don't know for sure, but I've heard. So the same thing is true for, like, just to give a sense of like why is this terminology complicated? Words have come back into style. Queer was what it meant long ago, and then when many of us were growing up, it was considered really derogatory, and now it's like what a lot of people really, really identify as. Transgender and transsexual, in my understanding, are really almost the same thing, but just depending on like the era that you're from. And actually, very few people actually even say transgender anymore. Like, we more just hear trans now than anything. So a lot of those things are kind of the same thing. When people say queer, that is usually an umbrella term for the entirety of what I knew as the gay and lesbian community when I was younger. Then was like LGBT, then became LGBTQ, and then LGBTQIA, and it grows on and on. Oftentimes when you hear queer, people are meaning that as a catch-all for all of those things together. But some people very, very clearly identify that way. And queer often but not always, has a little bit more of a political tone to it than some of those other identities do. Anybody else want to?
Do we have another question back here? Yeah. And then I'll read the written questions.
Does insurance cover the hormone therapy?
Could you repeat it?
Does insurance cover the hormone therapy? Yeah. Generally speaking, yes. I'm going to give that to Dr. Mateen in a moment for her to talk as a clinician, but generally speaking, we're able to get that covered. That is one of the things that's under threat right now, though, since January. And then something else to add to like what the threat is. The threat is often talking about insurance regulations, other financial federal regulations that are aimed at persons under the age of 19, which is weird. Because the person who's 18 is legally an adult. And so we're seeing for the first time in my career, certainly in my experience, this being defined differently, like as a person under 19, which would include a legal adult. And so from a political standpoint, there's a lot of theorizing about whether that's testing the water on like trying to come for gender-affirming care writ large. But I do not.
So I actually think that under 19 is because Medicaid covers to age 19, so I think that that's where it comes from, but who knows, they could be testing the water.
Yeah, it can't be both, right?
But generally, insurance covers it, but I have to do paperwork to do a prior authorization every year to continue for the approval.
And it's also, the question that you're asking is probably emerging also as a regional question. So, you know, we are private pay, we have an insurance through my employer, and we live in the state of New York where trans health care is protected, and our Attorney General spoke out about that very, very early on in the year. If you are a youth on Medicaid in the state of Missouri, I bet we're gonna have problems with your care.
And I know that I have patients who have military health insurance, and they were covering, and now I believe as of October 1st, they are no longer covering.
I'll just add, I think kind of hits at that, and I'll agree with that too, but yeah, it's important to remember that in New York, one of the things that is helpful about New York is there are legal requirements for insurance providers to cover certain things. And, you know, for a long time, New York's Medicaid was one of the handful around the state that would cover country that would cover gender-affirming care. And so you long see folks who would move here from other states, like even going back 10, 15 years, move here from other states. Particularly, there was a big issue along communities along the Hudson, and they would come and basically be homeless, semi-homeless, find low-paying jobs so they could get on Medicaid and get access to the care they wanted, whether that was in New York City or they would kind of go up the Hudson. And so today what that looks like too is a lot of that, but also people who are moving here pretty regularly from other communities to either access care or coming in from other states like Pennsylvania and Ohio in order to access care. I know everybody sees a significant amount of people, especially from like Pennsylvania. Ohio is very restricted with access to care right now, so we're seeing a lot of families move here from Ohio. Typically they call us to say like what school district should we move to, like that kind of thing. But you know, a lot from Ohio, Texas, Florida as well, because it differs so much state to state, community to community. And so I think that's another dynamic that we're seeing a lot of right now.
And that's complicated too, because you're crossing states, and so the parents have decisions about, you know, how we're going to use a pharmacy, what's the legality in my state, what risks am I taking? And so again, you know, we can use Maria as a comparison, even if you had to have very supportive parents do that if you're a young person. Add to all of the complication that Maria has talked so openly about. You know, imagine, you know, it costs money, time, effort to cross state lines, and especially to move. You know, can you imagine moving for your child to get medical care? I mean, it's a big deal. You have to find a job. You have to. It's a lot of stuff, but people are doing it.
I mean, really, we have to think about, your question was a very practical one, but there are downstream, very important long-term implications of a question like that one. And really what the actual impact of the result of a question like that is that we have restrictions on freedom, right? That's really what's happening. So my kiddo, you know, she got an excellent score on her LSATs. She's being recruited by law schools all over the country, and she has an interview tomorrow with Washington University in the state of Missouri, who wants to give her a full scholarship to go to law school there. She's not going to go. There's no way she can go to law school in the state of Missouri. And I am from Kansas City. I grew up in central, you know, my father still lives in Columbia, Missouri, in central Missouri. I go back there several times a year, and there's no way she can go to law school in Missouri. So, you know, the long-term implications of having state-sanctioned hate against a group of people is that we will not be able to freely move across the country. That's the implication of the question.
I'm gonna read another written question. So a man of a trans child commented to me that, the mom of a trans child commented to me that she felt being trans is like being gay was many years ago, and that it's just a matter of time before being trans will be no big deal. I'm aware that in the West Village in New York City, being gay is no big deal. However, in certain areas of our country, being gay is still a very big deal. Do you anticipate being trans will ever be normalized?
At one point, I thought we were moving that way, but since January, we've been moving in the actually before then with the state laws.
This is an important question. I think about this a humongous amount. We have seen, we're living in a time where we have seen tremendous, what I consider, progress in such a way that, like 10 years ago, I would have thought that the tide couldn't change. And so something, if you can think back to approximately 2009, 2010, when what was then called same-sex marriage was still a big deal. And as recently as 2004, which is not that long ago, what we used to call same-sex marriage is now called marriage equality. It's controversial. I think that real marriage equality, we heard of the whole thing. Just kidding, kind of. But that's it's a joke. Really, no. But it was so controversial in 2004 that ballot initiatives were put on in many states, in order to help to swing the presidential election. And so in our lifetimes, we've seen marriage equality go from being divisive enough that it could be added as a ballot initiative to try to swing the presidential election, to having nearly universal, not nearly universal, but the majority of Americans supporting it. And so I often will think to myself, as a person who's nearly 46, being accepted as a gay person became so acceptable around 2011, 12, that it was almost disconcerting to me. I was almost are we not a minority anymore? It was difficult to wrap my head around all of the support that there was, and it felt for a long time similar to what Dr. Bettine said, that being a person of trans experience, it was moving, that experience was moving in that direction, where more people understood, more people were supportive, more people at least acknowledged that being unkind, discriminatory, and hateful was bad. But I think for all of these things, for sexual orientation, for gender identity, for different religions, for racial and ethnic minorities, it's all going in the other direction. Nothing was ever perfect, but everything I think feels more tenuous than it used to be. And so I think I agree with Dr. Bettine. A few years ago I'd have said yes, I think it's moving that way, but I think unfortunately for all of us non-majority people now, the risks are greater than I would have thought possible, really even 5 years ago.
I guess I would take that question and turn it back on the questioner and say, what are you going to do about it to help make, this is a choice how we move in this country. This isn't an accident. We didn't accidentally get marriage equality. No, that was a movement of people who turned out, who voted, who agitated, who put it on the ballot, who did the work, who went door to door, who raised awareness, educate, agitate, organize. We didn't get there by accident. We got there because of, decades of hard work. So the question really begs a different question. Well, what are we going to do about it, friends? This is a choice where we go from here.
I do think the one thing that changed forever is people are not going back in, if anything. So I think that the world is meaner than it ever was, but I don't think the community is going to de-identify itself.
I would say I didn't touch on most of the things I was going to say, so I won't repeat myself. But I think similar to Maria's point, I think part of it becomes one that what is the sort of onus on us to create create the world that we want to see within the community that which we can control, right? That I can't control what's happening in Washington D.C. I have no semblance of control over that outside of being able to call the Congressman Kennedy's office sometime and be I don't like this thing. And they say, okay, thank you, and listen, but they neighborhood, in my community, and the towns and cities that we all live in. And so it becomes even more important that we're doing that when we're that disconnected from what's happening nationally, or even sometimes on state time, whatever that looks like for you. But the more important thing is, what does this look like within the small communities of which we're parts of, whether that's, you know, in a faith community like this, whether that's in the town that you live in, whether it's in, you know, schools that you move in, whatever that looks like, you know, it's becoming more of our responsibility to put that work in. The other thing, I think, similar to Matt's point, about a year ago, almost exactly, I heard a presentation from some people from GLAAD, who does a lot of LGBT advocacy and awareness nationally, and they did a presentation about an ad campaign they had been running. This was last fall in Texas, I want to say, in Minnesota, I want to say. And basically what they were talking about was they ran this whole ad campaign because they wanted to test the theories around what would kind of move the needle on people's acceptance of trans folks and trans rights and different things and access to different spaces, etc. And what they found was the most impactful ads they made were these, and they played me some, these like 30-second clips that were basically, for lack of a better term, like meet a transgender person. Like this is your community member and like your friend and someone that lives in your neighborhood. This is who we're talking about. And I think the more that, similar to Matt's point, that people are sort of out and like not going anywhere, is all the more reason why I think we're sort of on that right trajectory, because ultimately this is a lot easier to ask to not know these things or feel like they don't understand it or feel like you don't really, I don't know, wrap your head around what's going on if you don't know anyone who's going through it or has gone through it. And as soon as you have that personal relationship, this is true for so many things, when we have a personal connection to something, it becomes so much more real and it becomes a lot more easy to navigate and sort of advocate for, because it's not some scary what if, like theoretical thing that lives down the street. It's like, this is my neighbor or my cousin or my family member or my coworker, and now I can kind of humanize it. I think the more we're able to do that as well is really important. And then the last thing I say is, I say this a lot, but on this particular thing, but is I think a lot of times people live in this space of like, well, I have to understand, essentially as a prerequisite to being like, I'm gonna sort of, you know, accept or be supportive, but like I just like I don't really get it, you know, like that kind of thing. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. There's tons of things I don't understand. I will never understand what it's like to be a trans person. I never will. And I spend my entire day with exclusively trans people almost all the time. And I won't, I never will. That's okay. But I have to come to terms with that and also understand that it's not like a prerequisite to my providing resource advocacy and support. And I think sometimes we get caught in that sort of brain trap of like, well, I have to do all this work to understand what they're going through before I can fully like be on board, and we'll just never get there. And I think the more people kind of understand that, the easier it is to move along the trajectory. I've been having a lot of conversations with different LGBTQ community organizations around the community, a lot of like grassroots groups and everything. One of the things we've been talking about was, on one hand, it's very empowering to look through history and say, like, we've done this before, we can do it again. On the other hand, it's also really depressing to look at history and say, we did this already, now we have to do it again. And unfortunately, a lot of, especially the state level advocacy apparatus and organizations, were exclusively focused on marriage equality. Like, that was the only thing they were working on. And once the state passed that, they all kind of fell apart and disbanded. And so there's very little in the way of functional statewide advocacy kind of apparatuses right now, which has been a very frustrating experience. And there's people who are trying, but you know, that was decades of organizing towards marriage equality, and now the organizations that have been around for maybe 5-10 years trying to do their best, but it's very difficult. So the more that we have those kind of people to back those things, I think is really critical, because that infrastructure already disappeared, unfortunately.
Thanks.
As someone who has taught in public school for years and worked with children who had any kind of disability, I was wondering what kind of advocacy, what kind of help, what kind of support exists in schools for kids who are going through this or feeling different, who need that kind of help that I think seems more available to people who are older.
So this is a lot of what we do. So it's like 40% of what GLIS does essentially is exactly that. So there's a couple of things I'll say from a kind of global perspective. In New York specifically, there's a lot of legal protections for LGBTQ students in schools and requirements for school districts to do certain things around making them feel sort of like safe and whatever. And the state's putting out guidance about that pretty regularly. Ultimately, it's still up to every school and school district how much they want to care and obey and listen to those things, and that's a fight that we fight every week. So there's a couple of things that I think in New York from a policy perspective that are really helpful. But the biggest of which is the Hadassah Dignity for All Students Act, which requires an anti-bullying legislation from almost like 15 years ago now. It was, when I started working in BPS in like 2012, 2013, it had just passed. So almost 15 years ago. And there's a lot of requirements there on how schools need to interface and to support complaints about bullying, complaints about young people and students not feeling safe. And so those are really helpful legal protections there. The other ones are, so in the early 2000s, the state passed SONDA, which was Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, which added sexual orientation as a protected class in all of New York State human rights and civil rights law. And then in 2019, they passed Transgender, which was the gender expression, non-discrimination, so the same thing for gender expression. So there's a lot of things in New York State law. The problem becomes that, as with anything, laws are only as useful as they're known about and enforced, right? Like if people don't know about them and enforce them, it doesn't really matter what's on the books in Albany. And so a lot of what happens is a lot of these schools and school districts, they face a lot of pressure from, say, the community, school boards, things like that, particularly in more rural communities. And they kind of do whatever they want and ignore things until we write strong letters saying you may not know, but this is in violation of state and federal law, so you might want to give this to your attorney. I'm not a lawyer, but this is what it says. And so we do a lot of that, unfortunately. But the most important thing, a helpful thing for students in these schools is one, having parents or family members that know what their sort of rights are. The last thing that we find that there's a lot of support at the superintendent and admin level because they're the ones who know, oh, we need to legally do this. And the last thing any school superintendent wants is their name in the paper for a bad thing. They want their name in the paper for a good thing, but they do not think that is the last thing they want is school district sued by ACLU or their face there. So they're very negative press averse, and so it's easy to kind of use that to advocate. But it becomes very difficult because again, you can control their policy in place, but we had a student who was at a rural school in the southern tier, and he was graduating, and he went to the student office, and they were like, "What name do you want on your diploma?" And I read out, which is honestly this is the other thing that I won't go off on a whole tangent about this, but almost everything that we talk about that we supportive and protective of trans young people is just better for literally everybody. I had this conversation about these middle school bathrooms for changing rooms for the school ones, and I was they were building a new complex, so they were going to create a whole new bathroom and everything. And I was saying the best thing you can do is just have private changing stalls for everybody, because it's insane that we have a bunch of middle school kids out dressing in front of each other. No one has a good time in the middle school bathroom. You're talking about making wanting students to feel comfortable. No one is comfortable in a middle school locker room changing room. So anyway, so similarly with that, one of the things that's a lot of schools is again this kid runs with their name. So my legal name is Jacob. There's a long family story behind that. Literally nobody calls me that. Nobody. My parents forget that's my name. And so it's weird when people call that or use that. I don't mind, but it just takes me a second to realize they're talking about me. So everything I've ever had would say Jack on it. That's just always been my actual name. And so if they had asked me, I would say the same thing, right? There's never been an issue about me being well, I know it says Jacob on there, but you should really call me this other thing. And so, but this student had an issue, and the woman working the front desk, their officer, yelling at him in the middle of the school about how, he can't do that and whatever. And obviously the principal got involved and it was settled. But the point is that you can have all these policies and administrative procedures and legal things, but you can't necessarily stop someone at the front desk of the school office from not listening and yelling at someone. And so that's what we run into a lot. So it's really important to have, I think, parents and students who are kind of engaged in knowing what their rights are, but also, school educators, school social workers, counselors, whatever, who are also that and also equipped and empowered to kind of intervene and say, you can't do that. You're going to get sued if you don't stop doing that. And so we do a lot of that, a lot of trainings for schools, a lot of helping with helped Buffalo Public Schools write their gender identity policy. We've done that through other places. Things like that, but it's difficult. But the last thing with that is that we also work a lot with, they used to be called gay straight alliances in schools. Now they use like gender sexuality alliances, except for one that I know of still uses gay straight alliance specifically because they think it's fun to make the announcements have to say gay on them. So I'm like, that's pretty cool. So that's the only one that I know of. But those are like sort of student groups focused on supporting LGBTQ youth. And we provide a lot of support to the faculty advisors of those groups around the community, because they are one of the main places where students are going to get this type of advocacy and support is kind of well-meaning, sympathetic teachers, counselors, social workers. And so we've worked really hard to develop a network of about 120 of those around Western New York to hopefully have them as advocates in their school as well. Because ultimately that's just what you need is hands-on advocacy, because they're not really going to care. They're going to do the path of least resistance as like a school district for the most part until you kind of force them to not.
And when Jack brings up the situation with the locker rooms, I mean, we have certainly seen in this nation and the world so much of this debate centering around restrooms, changing rooms, etc. And something that is, you know, pretty purely and simply true is that the opposition to affirming this issue would have us to believe that a trans person in a restroom, a changing room, etc., whatever, presents a danger. But statistically speaking, if there's violence in a space like that, the trans person is at much higher risk. And so another thing that's really difficult about that is that the statistical truth of the issue has been like reframed in the opposite. And so it's unpleasant to say, but like a person of trans experience is at much higher risk of a sexual assault, period, let alone like in a restroom or whatever. And so, but this has all been reframed to like play on people's fears. And you know, the way that plays out for real people too is like if you feel that there's no restroom for you, I mean, it's a public accommodation issue, but it's also, it's going to impact your body too. And I mean, I'm not going to comment on it with Dr. Bercy and Dr. Bettine here when they can comment on it better, but if someone has no restroom they can use, they'll hold it, and that's can cause them problems too. And people, if there's nowhere for you to go, people just wait, which is, it's a problem.
I have this. Another question. Then I have about 10 written questions.
So I have a grandniece who's about 24, who came out as trans about 5 years ago while in the Coast Guard. She was homeschooled till high school, and then she went to high school, got involved in theater. When I asked her if she always felt like she was in her own body, she said that wasn't the issue, but she didn't like being around macho talk, you know, straight men. So I'm wondering, you know, how common this is, what my attitude should be. I want to be supportive, I am supportive, but I don't understand what she's been going through. She's seeing a therapist.
So I think Jack already addressed this, that you don't have to understand. All you have to do, I mean, your niece is a person. Just support them as a person. I mean, I treat all these patients. I don't know why they feel the way they feel. I don't think anybody knows this. They're trying to figure out the science behind it, but we don't know. I don't understand it, but I know that I'm helping my patients, and it doesn't matter why your niece identifies the way they identify. They are unhappy, and they will figure it out eventually, and they just need support of their entire family.
I think something that is commonly said is when someone tells you who they are, it's best to believe them, and it's hard sometimes though to do that, especially if you've known someone one way for a long time and something changes. It can be hard, but I think the best thing you can do is to just be as supportive as possible, and her journey's probably still. I don't think around
talked about the journey. Please tell us what a typical journey is, with the understanding that there is no one journey. And then another question is, do they, I guess people who transition, do they have to change their sex on their documents? And then I have a lot of questions on hormones after that.
I'll just on the documents piece real quick, because that's honestly something that's incredibly relevant right now as people try to figure out what sort of documentation is on what. Some people do, some people don't. It's also not like a one-time thing. There's lots of different documents to change your stuff on that some require you to go through those first, and some are a lot more intensive. So, I know a lot of people that would have updated, say, their driver's license, but not like their passport, for example, or things like that. But I think it's always in the lens of like what's going to make my life easier and sort of do. For example, if you are, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a transgender man, and he was talking about traveling internationally. He never changed his anything on his passport. I think he may have changed his name, but certainly not his gender marker on his passport. And if you look at him, you're like, this is a man. And he was talking about how difficult it is to travel, to hand someone a passport and present like this is the way I am, and they look at it and it says like female on it, and it just gets confusing. So there's a certain level of just like safety and need that comes with a lot of that, but also right now there's a lot of hesitation to really give the government a whole bunch of information and reasons to know where all the transgender people are. And so there's a lot of conversation on what to do with that, and different people are managing it differently. It also depends. So for example, one of the people that I works at GLIS is from the state in the South, the Deep South. She's from Mississippi. And I remember she was doing her like legal name change process, and she needed to get her birth certificate. And if you were born here, for me, I could go to City Hall downtown, walk up to the clerk's office, fill out a couple forms, pay a little bit, I'll get a birth certificate. It's not quite so simple in one, in Mississippi, or two, to change your gender marker in your birth certificate in Mississippi is very difficult. And so it took a significant amount of time, energy. She had to end up going there. So waiting until she had a trip planned to see family, things like that, in order to make it happen. The other thing, actually, we're doing a lot of kind of advocacy work around this right now, is that one of the issues become, especially even for immigrant and refugee folks who are moving to Western New York, that to get married in Buffalo City Hall, you need a significant amount of documentation, including a birth certificate. Other municipalities don't require that. The state doesn't require that, just the city does. And so we've been trying to work with them to remove that barrier, because if you move here from another country, you're not really going to have a birth certificate. But the reason we got involved, and it was very true for a lot of trans folks who are moving here from other states that might not have a birth certificate or have one that's updated that reflects the rest of their documentation. And so you get these different barriers and legal barriers when it comes to access to things like marriage, but also housing, employment, all of those. And so most people that I know here in this, I'm slowly working through their documents and doing that. But it's just a very, very, very involved, long process that can also cost a lot of money, as well. So some people do, some people don't. I think most people do, just for the sake of, it just makes some things a lot easier, and you get a lot less weird looks and questions when you're going through security somewhere. Honestly, it is a big factor.
Can we have some, going on to the journey question?
Sure. Her present journey, Dr. Gale, is very much the way Jack described it, because Lindsay's passport still says the name she was assigned at birth. So we talked to, she's a student at McGill University in Montreal, and we talked to an immigration lawyer that advised us to consider not having her come home until graduation, because every time she crosses the border and her constitutional rights are suspended on the border, she is putting herself at risk. So she often has to present in a more masculine form as she's going across the border, so that she doesn't, raise the ire of any particular customs agent. And, that creates a very, every time she's coming home, it's an issue.
So I think the journey is, it's you developing as a person. And I think that the individuals that are trans have a much more difficult journey. They have a lot more obstacles in their way. So when we want to talk about the journey, we want them to talk about their obstacles so that they feel better and that we can, say, hey, if you go to GLIS, they can help you with that. I mean, that's every patient I have. I actually do you know about GLIS? I really recommend you look into it.
There's just not a simple answer about journeys, right? I think if we all think of our own, we could stay all day and night talking about this, but we can all probably think of something that we came to understand about ourselves over time. And that's probably the one thing it has in common with that is something that over time you get to know yourself better. You understand why you like what you like and why you don't like what you don't like and why you feel how you feel.
Then I received several questions about hormones, about the criteria for starting hormones, and then what would happen if they were no longer available, how long do people have to take the puberty blockers or gender hormones to have a permanent effect, and will they have a permanent effect on their fertility, and are there different puberty blockers, again, how long are they taken for? And then also a question about the next step surgery. Are there certain criteria for surgical care?
So, in order to suppress the endogenous sexual characteristics that are going to develop, you would stay on puberty blockers until you're on adult doses of gender-affirming hormones, which would suppress your body's having the endogenous hormones. But everybody's going to be different about when you would start hormones, but basically we require that if they're under 18, that they've been seeing a mental health provider who supports the transition, and that they have a parent who supports the transition. And we go over all the effects of the hormones and have them sign an informed consent that we went over everything about fertility. And definitely if you don't let somebody go into puberty, they're going to be infertile. And if they went through full puberty and then started gender-affirming hormone therapy, it could affect fertility, but it's like I tell the trans males, okay, testosterone might affect your fertility, but it's not a birth control. So you still need to use, be careful and use barrier contraception or whatever.
And is surgical criteria, is somebody else surgery then the next step?
Oh, surgical criteria? Yeah, they essentially have to be 18, generally speaking, and I think one of the bigger things now is there's just not many surgeons, so the wait lists are very, very long. Finding someone to do it, whose work you can trust, has become increasingly difficult, and got better, and now it's more difficult again, but generally speaking, a person has to be an adult.
And then there was a question, is if a parent, does the parent need to consent for this care?
For under 18, yes, not over 18.
Okay, thanks. So then I received another question. It said, I found that speaking out for minority, including minority issues, including LGBTQ, on Facebook or social media has left me feeling attacked or not affected. With feeling threatened to speak freely, how should we advocate or what actions can we take at this time?
I can see we have a couple of thoughts on that stuff. I actually ended up deleting my Facebook a couple years ago. It was like a betting and fights with people on there, and I ended up deleting it because I was like, I can't keep doing this. But one of the things that I think about a lot when I'm told, particularly when it comes to social media stuff, I'll start there, is that one, like social media is not like the real world. And so like, and I was just having this conversation a lot over the past 2 weeks for a very different reason, but it sort of loses that sense of like, we're all just like people kind of thing when everything's through like social media. So people will say like dumber stuff, people will say stuff without thinking, and it becomes people who are the ones who are significantly more opinionated are going to be the ones who care, because most people are like, I'm not going to waste an hour and a half getting in a debate with someone on Facebook. Obviously, I was happy to do that, but most people are not. And so that's one. Two is also one thing that I used to think a lot about was like, and this is not just true like social media, but this is true of how we speak up, how we advocate in general, is that like, it's not always necessarily about changing the mind of the person that you're talking to. It's letting everyone know who's like watching and looking at that there's someone who's willing to stand up for these people, whatever that looks like. So if you're like commenting on someone's like social media stuff, yeah, maybe you're going back and forth and no one's in that conversation's mind is changing. But there's a bunch of people who are reading that, who are looking at that and thinking, oh, maybe I didn't think about that point. Or someone saying, thank you for standing up for this. I didn't feel safe doing it, but I'm glad someone else did. So I think a lot about that when it comes to certain things like, I can move in spaces very differently. And so if I have access to be in certain rooms and at certain tables that other people might not, I'm going to use that to say things that, my trans friends and loved ones would want me to say, or would say if they were in that room because they just don't have access to it. So I think about that a lot, and that's true on social media as well. But in general, I also keep in mind that like, and just personally the way I think about it is also very much like, I'm not having a super fun time when I'm being like yelled at by people about something, but it is significantly less scary and dangerous than being a trans person in the United States. So like, I'm good. Like, I'll take it. I'll get yelled at sometimes. That's my job. That's what I'll do. And I'm happy to kind of be that protective layer a bit and shield a bit to people, because I can take it, and I'm not, I'm less likely to have some kind of violent crime perpetrated against me because of who I am. So I might as well be out front a little bit more, and I'm sort of happy to do that. So that's how I see it, at least.
I think something that's very hard about social media and the internet in general is that, like, if we look back to like 30 or so years ago when the internet was fairly new to all of us, it was a great place to find a lot of information. I think something, unfortunately, there's a lot you can read about this that social media has done. Like, the social media companies generally don't have a perspective; they just want your attention. And what gets people's attention the most is the most salacious, usually negative content. And so something, I didn't delete my things the way that Jack talked about, but something that I determined, and I also, as a gay person, even as a gay person, I still move through the world fairly easily. I stopped arguing with people on social media and diverted my energy to door knocking in Pennsylvania in 2022 and 24. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. It was like the way that I felt like I could make impact, but I learned it was hard when I was a little younger to not get these, like, what I would call Facebook fights, but what I had to learn over time was, at some point, we're not even really arguing about real things, or sometimes even with real people, but it's very, very hard. And the internet is both a source of tremendous information when you're looking for it, and a tremendous amount of misinformation. And so I think one of the biggest things that we can do when we talk about social media and the internet in general is doing everything that we can to increase our media literacy and the media literacy of the people around us, and particularly younger, and I hate to say older people, like my parents who are in their early 70s, they're not necessarily amenable to horrible, mean misinformation, but other types of information. And so I think increasing our media literacy in general will help us to have better information in the world around all issues of all kinds, and these ones in particular.
I appreciate the question. I would answer it probably just a little bit differently, and in essence, that is sort of what I wrote my column about. What do we do in the present moment? And I talked a lot about my daughter's experience and how difficult it was for her, and then once she was able to get treatment and make a their service to the country, and their access to medical care. The most powerful government in human history has identified its targets, and somehow my daughter is the bullseye. How should I respond? And I go on to talk about Reverend Niemöhler's quote, from coming out of concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and my experience in observing the Trump administration attack, so many different aspects of our society, everything from journalists to scientists, to diversity, to federal workers, and the conclusion essentially that I draw about how we respond is really with solidarity for one another, that we have to be in solidarity with one another. So we have to find ourselves working in solidarity with causes that are adjacent to this one as well, because there's no universe in which trans people have a positive experience when we also don't have a right to free speech, when we also don't have a right to assemble, when due process is denied. Those are all things we have to consider. So my column kind of says, early in my career, I led an organization committed to workers' rights. We had a solidarity pledge. I pledged to be there 5 times a year for someone else's struggle other than my own. When we won, it was because our members recognized the defeat enabled by false divisions and saw their triumphs were tied to those of others. So this time, I will respond to the attack on my daughter by refugees, journalists, scientists, workers, nonprofits, and all those valuing diversity as well. I think that's, the solidarity is part of it.
And again, there are copies of that beautiful editorial on the stage. So the next question is, I guess, getting back to the medical component. What is the psychological vetting that is done in what situation do you turn a child down to offer them a gender-affirming care, medical treatment?
So hopefully they see a psychologist or a psychiatrist who has experience. There aren't enough of them, but I've never turned anybody down so much as I said, oh, you're not ready yet, let's wait. And, but the couple times I've done that, actually my gut feeling was right, because the father called me and said, I was going to cancel the appointment because my kid decided they're fine the way they are. And I'm like, that's great. Yeah, I wouldn't say I would turn anyone down. I'm just like, you have to see a mental health provider that clears you, and we have to talk through if this is the right thing for you.
I'm not a clinician, but we did have at Evergreen many years ago a person of trans experience in their 50s, and she developed breast cancer, and the clinician did have to take her off of estrogen because of the potential impact on that. So the only times that we've ever seen that in our practice is generally related to other medical things and making sure that it's not causing harm in other ways. But that was an emotional, the patient definitely understood. It was an emotional thing for her. Like, she understood, like, on one hand, being on estrogen sort of made my life a lot better, but on the other hand, in this situation, it has potential to make my life much worse.
Thanks. Just a time check, it's almost 11:30, people have to leave, that's cool. Just a couple more definitions questions. I guess the first question is, what is IA? I think it's LGBTQIA was the IA. And the other question is language, that he, she, they, I guess, just asking how should that be used?
Yeah, the I is intersex and A is asexual. And so intersex is essentially what would we say, indeterminate sex at birth? Would that be the right way to say it, to describe intersex?
differences in sexual differentiation.
So it's a D, not an I, okay.
An asexual gender refers to someone who doesn't feel sexual attraction per se, but they may still feel emotional attractions to people. But those are things even for like, even our own communities, we're learning, you know, how that exists and how that interplays. Asexual, I would say, is, I don't want to say it's an emerging identity, it always existed, but I think it's also, the more people know about it, it also kind of gives this identification idea to someone that's like, wait, I've never experienced all of this that everyone else is talking about. And then he, she, they, who wants to talk about pronouns? I mean, we know he, she, you know, generally are the pronouns that are associated with what we perceive as a male or a female. Historically speaking, there has been a long-term movement to figure out what is the appropriate pronoun for trans persons in general, and also for persons who don't identify as either gender. If you're old enough and have been in the community and the movement as long as I there was a movement toward a third pronoun, which was Z, Zer, Zers, sometimes spelled with a Z, sometimes spelled with an X. That never kind of took off in a very mainstream way. There are still people who use it, but you don't hear that very frequently. So they is what is most commonly used in a singular form for a person who doesn't necessarily identify as he or she. Often a person who's non-binary, gender expansive, where neither of those binary pronouns seem to apply to them. People will often ask about the grammar. If you're like, people will say it's like not grammatical, but if someone called on the phone, like if I told Maria, oh Maria, you know what, the doctor called, what would you say?
What'd they say?
Yeah, what'd they say? You know, like I didn't say who the doctor was, so Maria just would say what'd they say. And so we have that forever when it comes to grammar. You could say they is, and that's considered grammatically correct. People have generally accepted like they are, even when talking to a singular person, because it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. But I promise you, singular they has existed for you. You're probably using it.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question. We're talking about young people, but there must be people our age out there who felt that they were in the wrong body or whatever. What happened to them? I mean, they don't exist. Do you know people like that? I don't know anybody.
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
You know all trans people, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple things to that I'll mention and then I'll spend time in. One is unfortunately the average lifespan of trans people for a very long time is not that high. Whether that's due to homelessness, living on the streets, not being able to find jobs, all of that, whether it's suicide or violence. A lot of trans people just haven't lived that long because of living in this world. And so there's a reality where a lot of trans elders just never made it, whether that was, again, due to any number of reasons, suicide, addiction, anything. The other is that, I think we talked about this early, is the increase in vocabulary. There's a lot of people that I know that have said to me, if I had had this language when I was younger, I think Maggie was saying, there's a lot of people would have identified as a butch lesbian for a long time, but had they had the access to the language and resources that we have now when they were a kid, they might have gone through life a little bit differently because they just didn't know it. So we see actually a pretty significant amount of people who transition later in life, whether that's when they're 50, 60, 70 years old, because they're finally like, oh my God, I'm not broken. I finally have a word for what's going on with me. That happens pretty frequently. Actually, it's been a whole thing with our for older LGBTQ adults. And mostly it's like a social kind of thing. We do them at different places around the community. And this is almost a weird division because there's about 50-50 between people who have been out for a very long time, this is their community, and then the other half are people who have recently come out or recently transitioned much of their life and are looking for access to being part of that community. So we're seeing more and more of that now, but unfortunately a big part of it is also just that they didn't live that long. They just didn't.
a very, like, similar to what Jack's saying, a person I've known for a long time who identified as a fairly masculine lesbian for a long time, had, you know, shared with me around 2018 or 2019, like, you know, I've actually been trans my whole life, but I just didn't know there was a word for it, but I'm like almost 60 now, so I'm just gonna kind of write it out. And then like during what I call like pandemic classic times, like the early part of 2020, like my job for 17 weeks was to do like temperature checks, etc., to keep our house under open. And I was like down doing a temperature check one day, and the person I then knew, she came in and was like, oh, hey, how are you? And he said like, I was gonna wait, I was gonna write it out, I wasn't gonna do any hormones because I'm almost 60, but then this pandemic came and I was like, I'm doing it. So like, you know, there are people who will say like, who, you know, for him, he kind of thought it was too late at like almost 60, and then somehow the weirdness of the pandemic caused him to think like, no, I am gonna do this, and he's been happy since. So you don't hear it often, but it does happen sometimes, but it's not as commonly discussed or dreamed.
Has anybody seen the movie, the documentary on Netflix that Will Ferrell did called Will and Harper? Yeah. It's so good. So it's an amazing documentary. It's just phenomenal. It is a beautiful, beautiful film. And it documents the journey of an adult person who transitions in adulthood. It's really just, it's called Will and Harper. It's touching, it's hysterical. It's a beautiful, beautiful film.
Yeah, and just remember our previous assistant secretary of HHS, Rachel Levine, is actually a pediatrician analyst and medicine doc, for a long time, and she transitioned. I think she was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. So there's a question. Okay, and well, this will be the last asking question. And then I have one written question, and then I'm sure you guys can hopefully stay up a little later.
You talked a lot about what's happened since January and how bad things have gotten. And it got worse last week. And we're in a blue state. We're in a state where people get protected. And there's a lot of security in that. You talk about people moving to this state. There's an awful lot of people in those other states who are okay with everything, who agree with all the prejudice, who agree with all the rights being taken away. And they're happy with all of this. What do we do about that? What do we do about reaching those people? I mean, I don't think we have to worry about reaching people in this room, but you talked about Missouri and Ohio and Florida and Texas, and there's a lot of those red states where there's a lot of people that think, hey, this is okay, I'm happy with this. Where do we go from that?
I think something that's hard to, you make a very good point, something that's hard to kind of like sit with too is there's a lot of people, I don't mean here in this room, there's a lot of people like right near here who also feel that way, which is hard to wrap our heads around, and it kind of goes back to how the world is. Even coming here today, you know, Dr. Bursey told me a few weeks ago, like there's going to be police because there's all of these risks, and I thought like, yeah, there are, but I still wouldn't expect that in Amherst. Like, I just wouldn't, but I accept that I acknowledge that it's true. So to your question, as a gay person who's remained fairly politically active, and I come from a political family where my grandfather, my Uncle Ryan taught us, like, you always have to keep believing, like, you have to keep believing. And that's really hard, and I think the thing that is really hard right now is that we have, this is not a satisfying answer. But I hope it helps a little bit. In our lifetimes, we've seen a lot of change. And so all of the things that have been possible for our communities that are still possible, but are more difficult until recently, we didn't even have even an ability to kind of even sort of touch them a little while ago. And so we got into this horrific mess. And so I have to believe we're going to find our way out of it. And that when we look at history, we see that there's a pendulum. But right now, things feel so extreme that it's hard to imagine the pendulum swinging back. But I maintain an ongoing belief that when we continue having these conversations, when we do continue showing up, when people like Maria take a public stand, which is dangerous, even in the Buffalo News, it's dangerous. People probably called your house. I bet, right? Like, it's dangerous.
A whole family conversation
Yeah.
about the fact that property records are public, and this is gonna say Maria White Buffalo. Yeah.
And you're a well-known person anyway, as a former deputy county executive. And so I think what we have to keep on doing is, like, there's a lot of discussion. Okay, so to land this point, there's a lot of discussion now about the notion of pre-compliance, which is like following laws that do not yet exist, which is in some ways like the goal of these things. Like, executive orders are not actually law, but the places start following them immediately. And so to me, the only things that we can keep on doing are keep on going, keep on believing that change is possible, because like when we give up on that, which is easy to want to do, the opposition to the work that we're doing wins, because we've like given up and we've tired ourselves out. And so I think the only thing that we can do at a time like this is to keep on pushing forward, to keep on believing that change is possible, and to keep on demonstrating, you know, that we exist as people and that we want to support people and that we want to keep that understanding going. But I think something I do believe that there are people who are probably never going to reach. And so I don't want to say I forget about them, because I'm afraid of that. But I try to focus on like the people that we still need to reach, and to think that like we have to keep that going, because otherwise all of the folks that you mentioned, they win by default when we give up on that.
I mean, I look around this room and I think some of you probably remember before Black people had any rights, and that, you know, I mean, there are still people who are prejudiced, but by and by, Black people are the same as you and I, and everybody in this room probably feels the same way. And we've been through this many times. Women didn't have a right to vote. We just keep fighting for what's right, and ask and vote. Yes, get your friend, make sure everyone votes. You know, that's important. Vote out the people you don't like, disagree with.
I think your question is such a good one, and it's a question that's facing the entire country at the moment, and there's no easy answer to that. I mean, so we could, like, you know, like we could go have coffee and talk about that question for hours, and I probably would. Like, I'd be happy to.
You gotta get to the game.
But, me too, yeah. In any case, you know, like, so for starters, one of the things that we have to do to answer a question like that is to dissect the problem. Okay, so what then is the problem? Well, the problem was made worse during the pandemic. You know, social media, Jack talked a little bit about this, some of the questions talked a little bit about this, but, you know, during the pandemic, it forced everybody into online environments, right? It took us out of our common spaces, you know, and our common spaces are generally known as home and work, and then your church, your VFW hall, your union hall. Like, what are the common spaces that you find one another? Well, the pandemic really took us out of those common spaces and forced us into online environments, and then the algorithms took over, and it further, you know, segregated our belief systems and our echo chambers. So one way to answer that question is to really understand the problem and then figure out, you know, how do we rebuild bridges around, you know, different kinds of algorithms. And I think Rabbi Alex has been working with Betsy Constantine, the president and CEO of the Community Foundation, on creating something called Resetting the Table, where we get congregations together from different faith traditions and from different perspectives in order to help, you know, begin to have real life, in-person, cross-cultural discussions, you know, that take us out of those forced, segregated online environments that were really created, or not created, but pronounced during the pandemic. That's one thing. Another thing that we have to do is we have to continue the work. You know, I have been marching in the Pride Parade for 20 years. And at 20 years ago, that parade was very small. It was hyper sexualized in order to really push the boundaries, to be in the face. There was religious opposition at every single corner. And that's 20 She came with me as an infant. She's been there every summer since. So in her lifetime, it went from being that to there is not a single employer in Western New York that would not dare to march in the Pride Parade, because of course you want your employees to feel comfortable. All of the banks, all of the biggest employers in Western New York are in the Pride Parade, and it is a very family-friendly affair. I mean, I would sooner take young children to the Pride Parade than I would take them to the St. Patrick's Day Parade, right? That's a horrible football game for that matter. Yeah. So truly, the arc of history does bend towards justice, but it doesn't bend that way by accident, friends. It bends that way because we bother to put our hands on it and pull, and that takes work. And and I went every single weekend to Pennsylvania and canvassed, exactly, I mean, for months. We have to put our hands on the arc of justice and pull together, and we have to. It starts with good education. It starts with cross-cultural conversations. It starts by trying to get us out of these forced online environments and really, really try to invite, where we can have shared discussion and move towards understanding.
Thanks. And then last written question, I received this rather recently, so whatever we talked about, I guess they still need some little explanation. The USA is very binary in how services are provided. Restrooms, locker rooms, boards, etc. How do trans feel about navigating services in this country?
So something about that. So the world is very binary. It's an ongoing effort always to try to make the world less binary than it was. What Jack talked about earlier about like single stall things. We have a commitment at Evergreen, like when we build a new building or remodel something, to make single occupancy things. But our building is like the old part of the building is old, and then the newer part of the building is 10 years old, which is actually old when it comes to like terminology like this. And so something that was difficult is like when we tried to de-gender the restrooms at all, people had a sense of like, I don't know where to go. So we had to like create even newer signage to like indicate, like something that's becoming more common but it's not widely accepted yet is signage. We're not quite there yet because no one understands it yet. Signage that doesn't indicate who is the room for, but like what is the hardware in it. So like you'll start seeing more restrooms places that instead of having, like, we're used to seeing like the stick figure people, will instead have, you see it a little bit more commonly now, instead of any indication of gender, it'll show like a toilet, a urinal, such a thing is in there, and usually like a little baby indicating there's a baby changing station. That's very, very new. When we tried to do it, no one knew what it meant, but even that's a few years ago, so it's kind of going that way a little bit. I think I'm not a person of trans experience. I think the people of trans experience generally feel this question constantly. Like, how am I going to navigate a world that was never built for my existence? How am I going to navigate a world that never even, whether it's trying to exclude me or not, like is exclusionary by nature, where even in the places that I go where I'm welcomed, there's still a certain amount of decision making. But I think when we create new things, it's best to kind of like do them with that in mind. I was in Toronto last week. They've renovated their hockey arena. I now understand how ours could use an update. I didn't understand before, but now that I've seen theirs, I get it. And they have, there's always discussion about when you go to a public facility, the restroom sizes are equal, but the way that we use the restrooms is not equal. So you always see like a longer line out of the restroom assigned for people who are female. The hockey arena in Toronto now, they're imbalanced. Like they're imbalanced in size. Like they balance the size of the facilities such that like people can move through them better. But then they also have a few that are genderless. And so it's like, well, that's Canada. They're usually a little bit more forward than we are about those things. But I was like, that's a long-term investment in recognizing, number one, the old system didn't work. Like a men's room and a women's room the same size doesn't work. So like in this remodeling, they've already recognized that, which is for the general population. But then have also taken the time and effort to create a restroom that is just genderless. And I think that over time, and we see that too on the New York State Thruway. You'll be going on the Thruway, you see that there's at least one restroom in all of those new rest areas that are like that. But I think the world is so binary. It's in every document, right? Like Jack talked about the documents. What document do you, like, when it comes to your driver's license, how much does it actually matter if you're male or female, like on the driver's license? But it's always there. We take for granted that it's there. I think something that I'm, as a healthcare administrator, I challenge myself all the time about like, what do we ask because it's pertinent and what do we ask because it's interesting? And the line is different depending on what the question is, but I think that I would say that people with trans experience feel that conflict always, and our only goal can be to try to move things forward by what we create ongoing.
I have a couple of thoughts about that. I think it's a good question. I think one, I used to do a lot of training on like trauma-informed care for working with people and whatever. I used to do a lot of trainings, especially with young people. And one of the things that I would say a lot was that a lot of times we sort of conceptualize it. We hear the word trauma, we think of like a major event, like a car accident, like an assault, like whatever. And often that's true. But in many ways, the way our sort of brains and bodies process things is that can also manifest as the feeling of like being in a tank that's slowly filling with water, and like that constant flooding of dread and stress and like anxiety. That's not like, it could be going on for a long time, but I'm in a room that's filling with water, and at a certain point it's going to be full. And it's that sense of like dread and anxiety that I think a lot of people move through the world in, and it causes a lot of stress on your brain in terms of your ability to make decisions and your ability to sort of more effectively cognitively function. But also, and I talked about this earlier a little bit, but I remember reading a study when I was in grad school, when I was writing some papers on supporting trans folks, and when I was getting my social work degree. There was a paper about the significantly higher rates of UTIs in transgender people because they're like, I'm just going to hold it and not go to the bathroom because I don't want to deal with the anxiety of doing that. And I actually this with my staff when we go to like a new building, or going to a new space, going to a new place. There's always this sense of like, what is it going to be like? Am I going to be safe there? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to know what bathroom to use? Am I going to get harassed going to that bathroom every single time they go into a new space? So it's very, very, very stressful. But I think the other thing is that when we think about how we design spaces and forms, and we do a lot of this support for schools and other agencies, helping them design forms, for example. The two examples I always use for this is just putting out this sort of, I call them little green flags of like the small subtle things that let people know this is a place that's thinking about these things. And so the first example of that is I have two moms and gay parents, and when I was applying to colleges, 20 years ago, there was one school on the application that said like, parent one, parent two, and not like mother and father.
Oh my God, how did you decide who was which?
Well, there wasn't a conversation. Actually, it was not a conversation. I know exactly which one.
I don't even want to guess.
I know exactly which one it was. That's parent one. But regardless, and obviously that was the school I ended up going to, and for many other reasons besides that, financial ones significantly. But I still remember that was the one school that actually asked that. And then in contrast, I had a friend, this was a couple years ago, he has a non-binary child, and they were doing those, interest forms online for colleges, and the schools would ask them what's your name, and they'd ask them what pronouns you use, so that they were sending letters, they could, appropriately, ideally, do that. Only one of the schools actually used the pronouns they put, which is honestly just aggressively lazy at a certain point. Why are you even asking? It's just a simple fine, whatever. But only one school actually did it, and that was the school they ended up going to. And so we think about employment, we think about faith communities, we think about community spaces. If someone walks in and doesn't get those signs, it's the place that I'm welcome. The reason when I was a kid I grew up at this synagogue, even though we lived in the city on the west side, was because this was the place that a rabbi was willing to say, I don't know a lot about that, but I'm willing to learn and be welcome here. And that was just true here, and it wasn't at the time at other synagogues in the early 90s. And so we have to kind of really go out of our way to make sure people know, because they're not necessarily going to wait for you to go up to them and say something. They're going to see the clues all over the place. And honestly, I do that in spaces as a Jewish person too. I'm like, okay, going up to a house and seeing this was on the door, I'm like, I'm good here. Things like that. And that's really important as well, is how we try to make our spaces as sort of accepting as possible based on what sort of signs we're willing to put forward to people to let them know, hey, you're good here.
When we think about welcoming environments too, I feel welcome here, and I'm not Jewish. I walked in, people could, I don't know, for whatever reason, they never saw me before. A group of people invited me right over to their table. I happened to be sitting next to Dr. Burstein's parents. It wasn't even planned, what a treat, but I felt ridiculously welcome. I was an outsider coming here, and it was made clear to me from within minutes of being in the door that I was welcome here. And I haven't spent a lot of time here, but I've met 20 or 30 really nice people here, which also causes me dissonance about why there need to be police, right? Like, and so like when we think about that, any group that's marginalized in any way, when you get into the group and meet the people, it's almost always shocking to think that there's like an opposition out there that wants to cause harm. And so when Maria talked about like, you know, doing 5 pieces of service for someone different than you, I mean, that's what a lot of you have done today. You know, and like, that's something, right? Like, you know, I'm a stranger. I walked in, I had no idea where I was going. Dr. Burstein and Jack were like, sure, so on. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know the address? You know, but like, I didn't know. And, but I came in and felt immediately welcomed. And, you know, something on that topic that I want to say as a gay person, living in Western New York, we're a lot better off. Our health and wellness is a lot better off because of Dr. Burstein. Like, it's just a fact. Like, it's just a simple fact. It's just a fact. And so when I talk to people who do this type of similar work that I do, even in other parts of New York State, they can't believe, you know, how fast we got MPOX under control here, and that was because of Dr. Burstein, or how like forward-thinking we are on a lot of these things. And it makes a humongous difference. And I mean, you all know her, I think you all care about her tremendously, but like when you're a part of a group whose health is at risk and you have a commissioner who's always on your side, it makes a humongous difference. So thank you for that and for having us all here today. And for being your parents, who also know
All right, I think we're gonna close it up and gonna turn it over to Phyllis, and also, would you please take a copy of Maria's editorial. It's very moving, and it's be great to share with other people.
I want to thank the panel. You've just been so wonderful, so informative, and whatever we had hoped for, you've certainly surpassed it. Thank you very, very much. I just want to mention that Hadassah is going to have a follow-up program, and it's going to be on Zoom, and it's going to be October 12th at 1 p.m. And for those of you who signed in and left your email, we'll send that information to you with the Zoom link. We're hoping that we'll be addressed. We have a father and his grandson who will be speaking with us. Thank you all.
Yeah, that's it.
Right. does he remember me? I don't know. Well, the funniest thing about it is Karen got shot. And he named his Nice to see you. Yeah, nice to see you too. I hope so.
It's all very flexible.
Yeah.
I'm not sleeping anywhere. I think I have to see.
You know what? I think I have the vitamin if I actually not sleeping any better either. Last night I slept about 3 hours and then I lied in bed for about an hour. Then I just decided I'll just go read. I read anyway. And reading actually, I read things that aren't that interesting.
And then I fall asleep.
And then I get
Reading and getting back to the
So like from 3 to 4 to 3 a.m. But I went back to bed and then we had these producers that were, I have been dreaming, so that's why I am getting the vitamins because I mentioned to, well, the last time we saw Dr. Weiss, so I mentioned to her that my dreams, I'm just having wild dreams that are really memorable. And so I don't know, she didn't say anything, she can't tell me one way or another, but it's a change, it's definitely a change. But it's still up many hours. I told her in the beginning of the study that I feel good if I get 6 hours of sleep, that's a great idea, whether it's in chunks or
Me too. 6 is fine.
Yeah,
I can get
if
6.
I can get 6, I'm good to go.
Sometimes I get 8. I get 7.
Oh, I never get it.
Maybe twice a month or once a month, I'll get like 8, and that is amazing. That's like a miracle.
Yeah. So since I've been taking the pills, I have sometimes gotten 7, which is very amazing. But many times I do.
Because then you can see like, over the month.
Oh yeah, I can. So
Yeah, so for my week, so this is just for today. So for the week, and then you can see the month. And my goal is 8 hours, so you can see first it goes up there for a little while, but now it's all over.
So oh wait, that's so if I
You
go.
can look for the month.
Yeah. So I got some pretty good sleep the last couple of
What's
days.
your goal?
8 hours.
Yeah, she put that for her.
Yeah, so but I never ever make it, and some days.
You try the month.
Oh yes, yeah, I never ever, but I've gotten these are getting closer than I ever have. But like I used to have a lot more days like that. I don't have as many days like that anymore, but I still have.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
She said if people get,
Like
she
last
said
night I only got
80%
about 5
of the
hours.
goal, she considers that good.
Yeah. So these high ones are probably like 80%. So when I started, I had a lot of days where I got half as much sleep as I really should. But now it's less than that. It's
I guess
less than
a year or two to see the results of the study she lied up.
Yeah.
That was very good.
Somebody stopped that. Oh no. Hi, sweetheart. Good to see you. Really, you need another job. We came at the right time. Now we have an email. Somebody else. And then I found a transfer. Please, I don't need you at the outside.
I'm going through.
You're good, Bob. Thank you.
I tried.
Oh, yeah. Take me.
Yeah, I mean, and we all have examples of that.
Yeah.
Sarah went all around. She said she was going to run around. Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. See, yeah, right. I'm sure boys can be helpful to you if you have it to them. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Yeah. And who's your school board member? Did you copy your school board member on the tried to find yes. Okay, yeah, I would do that. Yeah, yes. I mean, do you happen to know what that? Usually school board members don't want to get really.
And like,
Here's my phone. Hi. I'm Sammy. You can still send it to them and say, thank you. Thank you very much.
yeah, it was nice to see you all.
Anytime you want lots.
Yeah, now I know. Yeah, now I know.
One of the questions that I asked that wasn't asked is, what happens to the people who are supposed to be getting therapy? And then they can't afford it once the idiot government takes it away.
It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet, but
It will.
And I'm not a clinician, so I don't want to say too much about what happens scientifically, but people's bodies begin a process that's called like detransitioning, where like no longer is the effect of the medication in their body, and so like the things start reversing essentially. Yeah, it is horrible. Yeah.
Think about all the suicides.
Yeah, right. That is one of the bigger, one of the bigger concerns.
But they have to keep on this therapy forever, right?
If they want to continue having like the effects of it, it's not like the person's body just begins.
Even if they went through surgery and all.
Yeah, because your hormones are still from your original body.
It's pretty scary.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
They're miserable people. I just don't understand.
Same.
What is it their business? You know?
What is it their business? Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Now all of a sudden politics are in the bedrooms, right?
Yeah, and are everywhere, really. Yeah.
It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, horrible. It's wonderful to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you. See you again sometime.
Sure.
So